We've been talking about how to fix what's broke, and from the very beginning, we made the point that all of this had to start with the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, because that's just the beginning. And that's the way it is. So then the last video just indicated after the failure, the punt by the current Speaker of the House, punt where they just took everything that was thrown into the deal and moved it on and passed it. And I just said that that meant that the system is dead. And that's a bit of a strong suit, but it just means, I think, when all is said and done, that we are not going to find this great leader in that office. There's not going to be a Napoleon or a Julius Caesar or a George Washington or anybody like that who really can just take the bit in his teeth, and the bit being the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and just become a great leader that takes us through all the barriers that are there and just transforms America back to what America should be. Well, I think in a way that was it was a little bit of a mistake, thinking that we have to think about this guy emerging from somewhere, because I think that's just not going to happen. You know, our swamp doesn't have anybody much like that. I mean, a lot of people think that Donald Trump is that as president, but I wonder, and certainly there's not another one like him to fit into the office of the Speaker. So the thing is not that we're looking for a great guy. It's the plan. And the plan is already intact. You know, I personally have been thinking about this for 30 years, more than 30 years, really, since I spent a lot of time in the dying Soviet Union and the emerging independent countries, in particular Ukraine. So this plan has been getting formulated for me for a long time, and I'm rather confident about it. One thing I should probably say, as in the office of, or in the instance of full disclosure, that I have lived with just an absolute dread for those 30 plus years of the existence of Ukraine. Now, that might make me some real serious enemies, just that it didn't really exist. It was not going to really exist. And I use the term chimera, which is the second definition for this ancient Greek word, that something that is hoped and wished for, but which is just an illusion. It's not going to happen. So that's the thing about Ukraine. And then people are loading in all these other things into the existence of this entity, this chimera. And the things that they're loading into are gigantic weapon systems, which, if they're not the beginning of the next world war, they're certainly preparing us for the launch of the next world war. So here are a couple of things that since we're in this situation, and we're in this up to our necks, up to our foreheads, wherever you want to go, if there is a very broad war, if there is a world war, which is part of the dynamic of our public narrative, if that happens, and we are still in there with Ukraine and Russia, and we're part of the war, which we are, if that remains the case and this great war begins, we will not be able to avoid it. We will not be able to get out of it once it starts. And another thing that seems like a possibility, that I think needs to be broached as a subject a little bit, is just the possibility of a civilizational collapse. Something like, we really just need to think about what happened with the Roman Empire. It just collapsed, and it was huge, and it was vast. It was spread out all over the West, certainly, and it went away. And if that starts again, which is a real possibility in the West, that there's just a civilizational collapse, then if we are in Ukraine for that, we will not be able to avoid that either. So we can't avoid a world war if that begins, if we are in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And we can't avoid the civilizational collapse a la the Roman Empire if we're in the Russo-Ukrainian war when that begins. We'll just be in it and we won't be able to get out. So what do we do to start avoiding this? And I think that's very clear. I'm very happy with this sequence. And one is simply, really, it starts with not doing things. For example, the guy who's running Homan, I think is his name, the guy who's going to be running he's going to be the border czar. Just the other day, he said that to get started, to start the turning the tide with immigration and illegal immigration and deportation, we have to start with at least, I think it was $86 billion just to start. So God knows what is going to be 500 billion or a trillion or something. We don't need to do any of that. We need to stop doing things. So the first thing we stop doing is sending any assets, war material, money, anything, technology, software, hardware, whatever. Stop sending anything to Ukraine, not just the war, but to Ukraine. And that has to happen at some point. Somebody does have to decide, and maybe this will have to be the speaker, this great new speaker that we don't have, but somebody will have to decide that this ends as of, 10 o'clock this morning or noon or the close of business today. That has to stop. Not another penny, not another nickel, not another dime, not another bullet, not another stick. Nothing goes to Ukraine from that point forward. So in total, starting immediately, it has to stop. And then at the same time that we're doing that, side B of that on the old vinyl records would be that we are going to inventory everything. And we're really going to have a huge team that goes in there and just tears the place apart and finds everything that was sent. If any of it can still be identified, then we need to claw those assets back. We need to bring them all back. We need to integrate them back into the system. Basically, the system of defense, because we're talking about war, and we're talking about the assets that have gone into this war that we do not belong in any way, shape, or form. So that's it. We stop sending anything at some point, which is basically immediately, but a date and time certain, so that we know that it's at 12 o'clock today, or it's at the open of business, to put it in business terms, tomorrow at 8 o'clock, whenever that would be. And so that is right now, we stop sending anything to Ukraine, not the war in general, not whatever we want to call it, but to Ukraine, because to go back to George Washington's great final address, where he was talking about being involved in, what did he put it, alliances and foreign entanglements and that sort of thing, and just don't get into that stuff. But he divided into two things: the people that we would become permanently allied with, a permanent friend, and that right now is Ukraine. And he was saying that might be somebody that is undesirable, and you don't want to do that, and now you're stuck with them like someone you married. You're stuck there forever. And that was his way of really delineating that point about foreign affairs and entanglements and alliances and that. And then the other side was that you could make a bitter enemy perpetually, which is what we've done to Russia. Russia was not our enemy a few years ago, a few very short years ago. If we were to, let's say we were to, when you go to the doctor, please tell me, what is the pain like? How intense is it on a scale of 1 to 10? And my dad could never do that. But, what was the likelihood of Ukraine attacking the United States 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when they really had collapsed and they were so weak and they were just not our enemy? And the likelihood of them attacking us at that point was really low. I mean, how low could the number be? 1. And now we have changed that. If we re whatever the word is, if we just rethought that number, it would be much higher. Maybe not 9 or 10, but it would not be 0 point something one. It would be a real number. They might attack us at some point because we're threatening them all the time, and we're putting missiles and various highly effective armaments into the system, basically on the Ukrainian side or on the NATO side. And those are things that are being propelled into Russia itself and attacking its energy system or whatever. So we are going to transform them from a country that 10 or 20 years ago, 25 years ago, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were just not going to attack us. We should have been ready. We should have been ready to defeat anybody who did attack us, but it just wasn't going to happen. And now it's a possibility because we have antagonized Russia to the point where they feel threatened. So anyway, so it has to start with we don't send anything there ever again, and we make that very clear. And then we inventory everything. We tell everybody what we're doing. We don't reveal secrets that have to be kept because they're still secrets, but that we are retrieving all of that. We're bringing it back into our defensive system, and we're doing that to make ourselves stronger, to make our defense better. But we're not doing it at all, sending things to Ukraine, because we are not trying to attack Russia. We're trying to better defend ourselves, and we're trying to do this in a way that doesn't involve us in this Russo-Ukrainian war. So those are the things that we have to do or not do in order to keep us from accidentally sliding into world war, if that should come, or to accidentally start participating in the civilizational collapse of the whole Western world accidentally because we're in the war on the side of Ukraine. And we can't avoid those two eventualities, the war and the civilizational collapse. We can't avoid being sucked into those and having ourselves defeated and having our civilization destroyed if we are in the Russo-Ukrainian war. So we need to stop doing a couple of things to prevent that happening. So that's the general number one that we need to do in order to fix the horrible problems that we won't be able to avoid. And so that's the thing. Stop sending anything to Ukraine and inventory everything, bring it back into our system and put it where it's for our greatest benefit, but no longer to destroy, to use Ukraine as our proxy to destroy Russia. You know, what a stupid plan that is. So the other thing we need to do, again, this is in lieu of being just blessed all of a sudden with another Napoleon or I don't know what else, Genghis Khan or something, in the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, because it just doesn't look like our system is going to produce an animal like that. So it's the policy. And the first part of the policy is what we just talked about. The second thing we need to think about is, in terms of civilizational collapse, maybe, is the immigration thing. And it's not just the people who are here illegally and who are criminals, and there really are a lot of them. But we just have to stop those gigantic numbers from assembling themselves outside the border, at the border, and all over inside the country. And one thing that we can do, one way we can stop doing something, instead of coming up with a new, like the new border czar said, to get started, just to start, we need $86 billion. Well, no, because then that $86 billion will multiply again and again. And then we're not going to stop anything. We'll be paying people, and so it'll grow. So the way to start looking at the way to stop, the way to start stopping things on the immigration side is to look at the NGOs, the non-government organizations which are associated with immigration. There are a bunch of them, and what they do is they broadcast to the world in their own way, intentionally or not. Please come here, come, 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 and we will facilitate your travel. And it won't just be the cartels and all these evil gangs that are devastating these people, but it's going to be our money that is really promoting the idea of coming, maybe to people who just hadn't really planned to do that. And then when you get here, this is how you get over the border. This is how you avoid the interdiction of immigrations. You get around the guards, really. And this is how you sign yourself up for all the welfare and all the support systems that our system might have available for people who come. So that is something that is a big, big problem. And if these NGOs weren't just these shining beacons and telling everybody, come, 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 and this is how we help you get in, this is how we help you get money, and this is how we help you avoid the cops and all that other stuff. So these NGOs, any of them that are involved in any way with the immigration system, they have to be, now get ready, they have to be defunded. Some things really do have to be defunded. Not the police, but these NGOs have to be defunded and dismantled. And then, just as we have to kind of inventory everything that we've sent to Ukraine already and get it back, we have to look at all the money and systems and talent that has gone into these NGOs bringing in more and more people, regardless of who they are. So we have to look at that. What have you done? And we have to think of ways that we maybe get rid of the people running these NGOs. Like I say, dismantle the thing, not just defund, but dismantle. So go back, and we're clawing back as best we can. And I don't know if that means we go after these often religious organizations who got all these assets, and they've still got them salted away somewhere because they did it in order to make money. And so what can we do to hold their feet to the fire and say, you committed fraud, you committed illegality, and we want those assets back. We're not just going to defund you from this point forward, but we want the assets that you have taken and put in your pocket and in a bank account somewhere. We might be trying to get those back and really put their feet to the fire so that they are not going to be in a position to just continue doing the same thing by other means, but that we're looking at you and we think that all this stuff was illegal or fraudulent, certainly damaging to our country. So the NGOs really have to be looked at very, very carefully and very aggressively. And a lot of that whole world has to go away. And they've played a very clever game. I can remember sitting I worked at a school, English as a second language school for Chinese immigrants. It was almost exclusive to Chinese. And so we would get some of these people coming in from the NGOs, and they would be just virtue signaling all over the place to an audience that they thought would be very appreciative of what they had to say, which is to say, oh, we're here to make sure that the people don't go through a 1,000-mile journey or a 1,500-mile journey, and that the women aren't being and children aren't being abused and raped and brought into slave situations, slave labor, slave sexual activity, and that we're going to go there and we're going to step into that and just guard them and help them out and things like that. But that was a lie. They were responsible for facilitating these mass movements and putting people into danger in jungles and at the hands of cartel and just other vicious gang members. And the same thing happening as after they crossed the border with the help of the NGOs and got into the United States, they found themselves still in these very vicious organizations, and children and women of all sorts were being abused. And it was because of these people who were virtue signaling all over the place. If they hadn't existed, the numbers would have been much smaller, and the distances traveled would have been much smaller. And their final destination in the hands of some gang in Chicago or California, I don't know where, those numbers would have also been less without the NGOs. So that's got to happen. So these immigration NGOs, these beacons, these bullhorns saying, come, 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 we'll help you. That has to be stopped, completely defunded and dismantled completely. And a very aggressive program to see if we can't claw back whatever's been spent. And take a look at people and say, okay, you are susceptible for accusations of fraud and perhaps simple illegality. So we have to do that. And that's, of course, to just reduce these numbers coming in to our immigration system and reduce the risk and danger that these millions of people are facing because of what we do, and therefore we have to stop doing. So no more new programs, no more $86 billion to just start the deportation, but just stop doing all these things that have facilitated the mass movement that has been so detrimental to our country, to our great country. So that's it on the war front, and the potential for a world war and the potential for a Roman Empire type collapse, which could happen to us. Those things have to be prevented. We have to give ourselves a way of avoiding them, which we cannot do if we're part of the Russo-Ukrainian war. And we can't start to do mass deportation and all the other things that need to be looked at in terms of the immigration problem. We can't begin that until we get these entities, often religious, Christians, others too. And I'm a believing Christian. I believe in the Bible, and I was a teacher of that for many, many years, but I'm not falling for that crap. So these are people looking for money. They're looking for nice jobs and very secure jobs, and their organizations are looking for millions and millions of dollars. So, we just can't believe anything that they say on the immigration NGO side. So there's that. And is there maybe a third thing that we really need to look at with our big program, as opposed to looking for the genius Speaker of the House, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, or whatever we're trying to look for, or George Washington? We're not going to do that because, in all likelihood, that person doesn't exist. But we have to look at the policy and what can we do to start. What can we stop doing? And that's the key, as opposed to starting up an $86 billion fund just to start mass deportation. No, we got to think of things that we stop doing, for starters. And then, yeah, of course, then we need to do the actual physical deportation. But first, we stop funding the people who are attracting so many people. And then the third area, beyond the war situation and the war dangers, and beyond the immigration situation and the immigration dangers, is NATO. So what about NATO? I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking about that and saying, well, does it even work anymore? And what was the original goal? And why are we still doing it, and what's the new goal? I think the way we need to look at this first is who and what are we defending in Western Europe, if anything? Who and what? Which countries? Which countries are at risk? Which countries are admirable, beneficial? Which ones would we just really like to defend if they're under any risk, if that risk even exists? So would it be the terribly woke lefty organizations that seem to permeate the United Kingdom at this point, or particularly just the capital city of London, and perhaps in Germany and other places too? Now, these are the globalists and the woke folks and the lefties and feminists in many cases, and the societies of Western Europe seem to be starting to turn against that. Well, that's real good. Let's cheer them on. But in the meantime, we just have to see, okay, what exactly are we looking to help and to defend? And who, which countries, which governments? Maybe it's the EU, which is not a very good thing. Maybe the EU is something that we need to broadcast, that we really aren't planning in advance to defend and sustain you against all comers. And then the other side of that, of course, is who do we see as the risk? Who are we defending? What are they like? What are their values? And who are we defending them from? Or should I say, as a former English teacher, from whom are we defending them? So would it be Russia? Maybe. Poland seems to think that they need to train all of their young men to be fighters and stuff to avoid an attack or to defend against an attack by Russia. Maybe, but is the general danger to all of the West, the Western civilization, the modern version of the Roman Empire, is the danger that they face primarily and directly from Russia? I think that would take a lot of thought, and perhaps we should be saying that not so fast. We're not going with that as our great motivating factor for defending hundreds of millions of people in these huge societies. So I think that it just isn't Russia necessarily anymore as it was under the Soviet Union. We have to look back a little bit into history. Who was attacking the West for, let's just say, 1,000 years? Certainly many centuries. And that would have been, well, it was the Huns at one point, and of course all the Germanic tribes at another point, and who else? The Huns and the Mongols. You know, we really had to defend ourselves from annihilation as a civilization from those groups. But it eventually coalesced in a general way into Islam. Islam attacking the Byzantine Empire, Islam sweeping around across North Africa and attacking across the Strait of Gibraltar into Iberia, into Spain, and then trying to get across the Pyrenees Mountains into France. So that was one direction for just Islam in general. But it sort of, it condensed itself a little bit into a threat from the Ottoman Empire. Same general directions and dynamics and all that stuff, but it was the Ottoman Empire that was attacking the West from every direction, and on the sea, in Iberia, in North Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe. And I think anybody who has a little bit of a historical knowledge of this would come up with the memory, the realization that the Ottoman Empire was at the gates of Vienna 2 times for sure, and the second time in particular, they were really in danger of being overwhelmed. And if that had happened, that was a very glorious rescue situation by Poland. So that's a great story. But it was always this, as we got into past the Huns and Mongols and that sort of thing. When we got past that, it was the Ottoman Empire, and they were trying to beat the doors down of the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Empire, but the Habsburgs, and they were trying to get through Vienna, and they almost did that, and Vienna had to be rescued. So those were that's who we were defending Western civilization from. And I don't think that has actually changed. Turkey is now the Ottoman Empire, or the what's left of the Ottoman Empire, and they're starting to really assemble their broad network, a broad network that would support them in an attack on the West, and that comes on many levels. Some of it is just that immigration, but that's immigration in Central and Western Europe. But if we think that Western Europe in Europe, or Western civilization in Europe, is under a threat, that's the threat. It isn't Russia, not in the same way. So it's the vast numbers of people. So there's an immigration element to it for sure. And more, there might be an absolute military issue. So we might ask ourselves, just to step back for a little bit here, do we really want to say that Russia is this terrible enemy that we must destroy at all costs? Or to go back into George Washington's idea that there's somebody that we might not want to be allied with forever, Ukraine, because they're not somebody that we want to be married to forever. And is there somebody that we might want to work with someday, but right now we're making them a forever enemy? That would be Russia. We might really need Russia in this great battle against the East, or the Southeast, or the South, to defend Greece, to defend Vienna, and maybe to defend the city of Kiev and the city of Moscow. And we have to keep in mind, this would be a little bit unpopular, but Mr. Putin, Vladimir Putin, is a tough guy, and you don't necessarily want to be looking at him with rose-colored glasses, for sure. He's a tough guy, and we got to be prepared to, lock horns every once in a while with him, at least diplomatically. But he is arguably, of all the major leaders of the West, perhaps the most openly Christian. I'm not an Orthodox Russian Christian. There's a lot of things I'm not, but he does seem to be, in general, on the side of Christianity. We need to talk to him and say, we would like to defend you against annihilation from the East and Southeast and South, as was a risk, the same risk that you were facing in a little different way, but centuries ago, in the 1600s or 1500s or 1700s and different times like that. So we need to find common ground against what is a common potential threat. And to use one of the popular words of the day, an existential threat, for sure. So that's NATO. So NATO has to change too, not just our involvement in the Russo-Ukrainian war, which is just a bad idea, and not just our idiotic defense against these overwhelming immigration numbers. Not a few immigrants, but it's the numbers that are just beyond the scope of any kind of defense. So the war in Eastern Europe, the overwhelming invasion by immigrants all over the Western world, and then NATO, something that was once quite necessary as a defense against Russia or Bolshevism, communism, the Soviet Union, but now is not under that same threat. There are still threats, and we better look at who are we going to defend. Are we defending the government of the EU, which is really not necessarily such an admirable operation? Are we going to defend the people of Denmark or the Netherlands or where else? Norway, Italy, the great Italian civilization. I mean, let's face it, what's left of the old Roman Empire. So are we going to defend those things? And against whom or from whom are we going to defend them? And I think that's not such a difficult thing to figure out. And one thing we might want to realize, we see it cropping up a little bit, that Greece, I think, is seeing some of the threat that they've faced for a long time from across the Aegean and other points to the east and again south and southeast of them. So Greece, we need to think a lot more about them when we think about Western civilization. So what exactly are we doing? We need to get our heads straight pretty quick, or we'll be all over the map, and we'll be in wars, in a situation of utter collapse and suffering existential threats right and left, every which way you look. So these things have to be thought through, and we'd better not miss, because we're outnumbered and we'll soon be outgunned. We've sold our best weaponry all over the place. We've trained people who are potentially our enemies how to use our greatest weapon systems and what's the methodologies that we would use. They're starting to learn all that. So we'd better rethink all of our major problems and think back, perhaps in a general sense, of not what we would do necessarily, but what are we going to stop doing on these three broad fronts: the Russo-Ukrainian war, the threat of world war, the civilizational threats, and the threat of a civilizational collapse internally and from externals as well. And also just the concept, in those same ways, the concept of NATO. Does it have a purpose? What is that purpose? Who are we defending? Who are we not bothering to defend? And against whom are we defending them? That's what needs to be done. And it needs to be done starting, I would say, a little bit later today, maybe this afternoon or evening, or in the next hour, at the close of business today or something like that. This all has to be done immediately.